9 months. That's how long I let the flies win, before I finally understood what my grandfather meant when he said the fly problem was never really about the flies. If you've raised cattle, horses, or any grazing animal, you already know the story everyone tells you. Buy the ear tags, spray the pour-on, call it done. That's what the co-op guy told me. That's what every neighbor with a chemical shed told me. And for years, that's what I believed too, that flies were a problem you bought your way out of. Here's the contrarian take. The farmers who actually win the fly war, long term, are the ones who stopped treating flies as the problem and started treating them as a symptom. The chemical route doesn't just fail slower than you think. It actively makes the following year worse because you're killing the very soil life that would have broken the cycle for you. I'm Volter. I've spent the better part of 3 decades on land that's been in rotational grazing since before that term existed, because my grandfather ran cattle the same way his father did. Heavy graze, long rest, animals always moving to ground that hadn't seen a poop pile in months. He didn't have a name for regenerative agriculture. He just called it not being stupid with your dirt. I'm going to walk you through the 5 things that actually broke my fly outbreak this year. Not theory, not what I read in a magazine, but what worked on my own ground with my own cattle, including the mistake that cost me a sick cow and taught me more than any success did. Stick around, because the last one is the reason most fly control plans quietly fail by August. Most people think fly control starts with a spray bottle. It starts with a step counter. Here's the mechanism. Horn flies and face flies lay eggs in fresh manure, and that egg-to-adult cycle runs about 10 to 14 days, depending on your climate. If your cattle are standing on the same ground for a week or more, you're not managing flies. You're running a nursery for them. Do this. Move your herd to fresh paddock at minimum every 1-3 days. And if you're in a heavy outbreak, push it to daily. The moment manure sits still long enough to become a hatchery, you've lost that round. Why it matters? Every day of delay isn't neutral, it's compounding. A paddock that sits 4 days instead of 1 doesn't have 4 times the fly pressure. It can have exponentially more because you're allowing overlapping generations to hatch. I learned this the hard way. 2 summers back, I got lazy on a paddock. Told myself 1 more day wouldn't hurt because the grass still had some height left. That 1 more day turned into 3. And by the time I moved them, my cattle looked like they'd been fighting a war. That mistake alone probably cost me 2 weeks of fly pressure I didn't need to deal with. And that's just the foundation. Because moving them fast only works if something's actually breaking down what's left behind. Everyone obsesses over what's ahead of the herd, the next paddock, the next grazing plan. Almost nobody thinks about what should be following behind them. Here's what's actually happening biologically. Fly larvae live in the manure pat for those first 2 weeks before they're mobile. During that window, they're sitting ducks. Literally, if you got the right birds. Do this. Run a mobile flock of poultry. Chickens work, but ducks and geese contribute too. 2 to 4 days behind your cattle, not alongside them. The lag matters. You want the manure fresh enough that the larvae are still in it, but old enough that it's not still steaming. Why it matters. A chicken scratching through a cow pie isn't just cute homestead footage. It's physically destroying the pat structure and eating the larvae inside it before they mature. This is one of the oldest tricks in rotational grazing, and it works, but only at the right density and the right lag. Here's the honest caveat nobody puts in the highlight reel. This alone won't save you, unless you're running poultry numbers that most small operations can't justify, because there's only so many eggs one farm can sell. The birds knock the pressure down. They don't eliminate it. Anyone telling you chickens alone solve their fly problem is leaving something out of the story. which is exactly why, when the birds and the movement together weren't enough, I had to get more aggressive. That's where the real war started. This is the piece almost every fly control guide buries at the bottom, if they mention it at all. I'm putting it here because it's the one that actually turned my outbreak around. There are two real categories if you're avoiding chemical treatments: bait traps and adhesive traps. I tested both extensively and the results weren't close. Do this: skip the bait bucket traps as your primary method. I ran 5-gallon bucket traps, pop-top bait traps, and hanging bait bags for 2 full weeks. The bait traps caught flies, but slowly, a trickle, not a flood. Some days I'd open a 5-gallon bucket trap and find maybe a dozen flies for a full day's work. Why it matters: bait traps rely on flies actively seeking out an odor, which means you're only catching a fraction of the population moving through your pasture on any given day. They're not wrong to use, they're just not enough on their own, and if that's your whole plan, you'll stay frustrated for weeks. The trap that actually broke the outbreak was large format adhesive fly paper. Not the small hanging strips, but the wide industrial rolls wrapped around something with surface area, like a trash barrel, and set right where the herd waters. Within 48 hours of running that, alongside my existing efforts, I went from a cloud of flies on every animal to counting individual flies on one hide. That's not an exaggeration for effect. That's the actual timeline. Heavy, heavy, slightly less heavy, then almost nothing. It wasn't gradual. It was a cliff. But I need you to hear this before you go buy a truckload of glue traps. Trapping alone, without the movement and the birds underneath it, would not have worked nearly as fast. This was never one tactic winning the war. It was 3 tactics compounding on each other, and the trap was just the piece that made the other 2 visible. Here's where I have to get specific, because this will save you actual dollars. Do this. If you're buying adhesive traps, buy the thick industrial rolls, not the wand-style sticks marketed for barns and stables. I ran both side by side. The wand sticks ran nearly the same price per unit as a full roll of paper, but caught a fraction of the volume. And worse, they picked up honeybees. The wide rolls, run properly, never caught a single bee in 2 weeks of daily use. Why it matters: this isn't just an efficiency question, it's an ethics one. If you're running a farm that depends on pollinators for your pasture and your garden, a trap that's killing your bees alongside your flies is solving one problem by creating another. Surface area and placement matter more than brand name here. Budget-wise, expect to spend around what you'd spend on one fast food meal per day during peak outbreak. That's the real cost of the aggressive phase. It drops off fast once the population crashes, often down to once or twice a week within a couple weeks. And I'll be straight with you. Yes, the adhesive traps are rough on the flies themselves. If that bothers you, I understand it. But weighed against a herd stressed enough to lose condition, or a calf at real risk of pink eye or fly strike, that's a trade I'll make every time. Now all of this, the movement, the birds, the traps, that's the visible war. But there's a piece underneath all of it that most people never connect, and it's the one that determines whether you're fighting this same war again next July. Here's the part almost nobody tells you, and it's the real reason I avoided the pour-on chemicals even when I was desperate enough to consider it. Ivermectin and similar pour-on treatments don't just kill the flies on your animal. They pass through the animal system into the manure. And that manure is supposed to be the engine of your whole pasture. It's what feeds the dung beetles, the nematodes, the microbial life that breaks organic matter down into soil your grass can actually use. Do this. If you must use a chemical treatment for a genuine emergency, isolate that animal's manure impact where possible and understand you're taking on a soil health debt that has to be repaid. This isn't a moral lecture, it's mechanical. Kill the dung beetles and soil microbes this year, and you've weakened the very system that would have suppressed next year's fly population naturally. Why it matters most. This is the actual answer to who profits when a farmer reaches for the chemical shortcut. It's not some shadowy villain. It's simpler and sadder than that. It's next year's version of yourself, paying for this year's convenience with a worse outbreak, weaker soil, and the same decision to make all over again, except now you're doing it with degraded ground instead of healthy ground. That's the piece that changed how I farm, not the traps, not the chickens. Understanding that every shortcut you take with your soil sends you a bill later, usually with interest. So here's the war, laid out plainly. Move your cattle before the manure becomes a nursery. Run poultry behind them to break up what's left. Close the gap with aggressive trapping using the right traps in the right place. Skip the cheap wand sticks for the wide rolls, and understand that every chemical shortcut you take is a loan against next year's soil. Reality beat my expectations here. I expected to lose this fight, or at best manage it. Instead, in under 2 weeks of aggressive layered effort, I went from a herd covered in flies to counting them one at a time. That's not luck. That's compounding effort. Same as compounding interest, just working in your favor instead of against you. If you take one thing from this and do it today, walk your current paddock and check how many days your cattle have actually been standing on it. That single number will tell you more about your fly pressure than anything else on this list. Next video, I'm breaking down exactly what happened when I tried making my own bait for those 5-gallon bucket traps, including the one homemade recipe that actually outperformed the commercial stuff, and the 2 that were an absolute disaster. Now I want to hear from you. What's the one obvious farming shortcut you were told to take that ended up costing you more in the long run? Drop it below. I read every one.